Welcome back, one and all. You are listening to the NTC podcast. Aaron Washington here, along with Aaron Pearlstein, another member of the NTC team. We're glad to be back on the mic with you guys. And we are currently in the aftermath of quite a blockbuster deal here in the NBA. We're approaching the trade deadline, and today is February 5th, a Sunday, and we're just a few days away from the deadline. If you go back and look at past history, recent history, you will see that many deals that go down during the trade deadline period usually happen within that week of the deadline. So I would say maybe no more than 3 or 4 days away. And this year's no different. We had the Hachimura trade not too long ago. And then today we are currently figuring out what exactly this Kyrie Irving trade will mean for the present and the future of the Dallas Mavericks and the Brooklyn Nets. Aaron, I don't know about you, man, but when I saw this deal, I was in a little bit of shock. And then I'm just kind of like blown away that Kyrie would kind of, I wouldn't say he completely destroyed the Nets, but he really just kind of threw them for a loop as he's done everywhere he's been. Would you agree with that?
I would. It's sad it ended this way. I'm not sure Brooklyn could have done anything differently except not sign him. But for what occurred, I think they came out pretty as unscathed as you can. I was really impressed with Sean Marks and the rest of the front office and the quick thinking and getting in return that made a lot of sense. Honestly, you got rid of Kyrie per his request and also for the good of the team, and also addressed a lot of needs at the same time. And to be able to do both of those together is awesome and is something that's usually not seen. So, I think they've been missing a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith all season. They're 30th in offensive rebound percentage. They're not a great rebounding team, but getting someone like that to play that three position is really big. And then obviously Spencer Dinwiddie coming home and being one of the best isolation scorers and this one of the top isolation teams in the country. Sorry, talking a lot of college, but in the league, it's a good fit, and I'm excited to see it.
I am too, man. Just as an overview for everybody for this podcast, we're going over two different aspects of this deal. So obviously there's the part of the deal that we're currently talking about. It's the on-court implications. And that's what most people talk about, rightfully so, because it is the game of basketball. We need to know how a trade is going to impact both teams as far as how they're going to mesh with each other, how it addresses needs that one team may have, how it takes away from a certain team. That's all very important, and we need to discuss that. But on the other end, a little bit later, we will be discussing how this affects each team's cap sheets. Anil Gagna of our team here in NTC has gone through and updated the cap sheets for both sides. So I'll put that on the screen here shortly. And then also the draft capital. There were 3 draft picks moved in this deal. That's very important to discuss as well. So we'll get there in just a bit. But to get things off here, man, I mean, yeah, like I'm with you. This trade definitely it was interesting from both sides. And just kind of starting off with the parameters of this deal, Kyrie and Markieff are on their way to Dallas. Markieff was kind of like a late addition, and initially wasn't reported that he was in the deal, but Woj came back a little bit later and reported that he's also included, so he's coming back. So at least the Mavericks get a power forward to somewhat replace Dorian Finney-Smith at that position. And then the Nets are getting Spencer Dinwiddie, as you mentioned, he's coming home. That's where he had his best years was, and they were in Brooklyn. Back just a few years ago, he was a borderline all-star player, averaging 20 points a game for them. You look at his efficiency. I mean, he's not going to blow you away with his 3-point shooting, but from 2, he was very efficient, 58% from a 2-point range in that season. I think it was the one before he got hurt. But that's where he experienced his best basketball, in my opinion, was that season there in Brooklyn before he got hurt. Dorian Finney-Smith, as you mentioned, is coming back for them. That's another great utility piece. It seems like Dallas is, or Brooklyn rather, they're loading up on good utility pieces.
Yeah.
Finney-Smith has been down this year. His percentages have been down. He's been hurt a lot of the season, which I think is a big part of the reason why. But you go and look at what Dorian did last season for them, and it's very impressive. I mean, he was 60% from the 2-point range and almost 40% from 3 with Dallas, in addition to his great defense where he can guard pretty much 3 positions on the court, which is always useful. And then what we're going to get into a little bit later is a first-round pick that's unprotected going to Brooklyn from Dallas. And then they're also going to get a 2027 and the 2029 second round pick in the deal. So that's very interesting as well. But I mean, initial reactions here, Dorian Finney-Smith is a great pickup, as you mentioned, for Brooklyn. And you add him in with Seth Curry, and you add him in with Royce O'Neal and Claxton, who has been absolutely awesome for Brooklyn this season. And I mean, you got the makings of a very solid team. They lost star power, but they gained another utility player that's going to help them with their defense. It's been much improved this season, and just hitting outside shots, open looks. So across the board, I mean, Brooklyn's still in a good position. They're still going to be a very good team. I don't know if they're at that championship ceiling that they were before, but I mean, they're going to be a tough out for anybody that had to play in the playoffs here. So I like this.
I agree.
Brooklyn, and it could definitely. It's still going to be a fun watch over there, even without Kyrie Irving in the fold.
Right, I agree. I think, like I was saying, to be able to get the disgruntled player out and also revamp your team and bring in guys that are high quality guys that hopefully, allow you to keep making a run in the Eastern Conference and not really lose a step. And I think they did do that. And I think it's really interesting. They have a lot of almost probably a 10-man lineup now. Probably the best defensive front court, just overall starting five that you could put out there. Defensively, especially with Ben Simmons at the 1 and Claxton at the 5, with Dorian Finney-Smith inside, I think that's an awesome lineup to have. And everyone wants to talk about, like, the first question a lot of people had was, what does Kevin Durant think about this? Like, how does he feel about this? And if you think that they were able to make a deal and make Kevin Durant happy, you're wishful thinking, and I think this is the best they could have done. And, you're given a situation that you can never even dream of. And in 4 days, they got a package that I feel like really changes that roster and puts a great future together. Because, like it or not, if KD decides to request a trade in the next few days up until the 9th or in off season, there was nothing that you could do to actually affect that. And you progressed forward and made a, good progressive move for the organization. The Nets are the number 1 team in isolation offense. You get the Spencer Dinwiddie, who is the 100th percentile in isolation percentage, time in isolation. He shoots 40% in isolation. He's also a great passer, assist to turnover ratio of 3. Teammates score 51% of the time on threes when he's assisting. And I think, you put that next to Seth Curry, like you said, you put that with Kevin Durant, Joe Harris, Cam Thomas, like last night, all those guys with him. I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty bullish on the Nets' future. You get the kind of toxicity out, and you put together a pretty quality lineup that is very versatile.
Yeah, there's 2 aspects of what you just said that are very important. The first of which being the situation that the Nets were in, essentially backed against the wall. They didn't have a lot of options, with Kyrie basically putting an ultimatum in front of them. Hey, you trade me to, you probably gave them 3 or 4 teams, because I'm sure he doesn't want to go to Charlotte or something. He's at a point in his career where he wants to win. So it's like, hey, you trade me to one of these 3 or 4 teams, get this done, or I leave in free agency for nothing. And that's one of the most damaging, devastating things that can happen to a team, is losing a top, let's say, 20 player in the league for nothing. I mean, that will set you back quite a ways. So the Nets basically had to pivot within a week's time, from roster set, you got everything you need to make a championship run, to, man, we got to shake this thing up completely between February 3rd, I think it was, where he made his request, to now the 5th, before the 9th, which is the deadline. So the speed in which they got this done is very impressive. And it looks like they were talking to the Lakers as well. The Lakers just didn't have the assets. I mean, you trade Westbrook back, and it's like, okay, that might be a 1-season pickup. He might be gone after this season because he's going to be a free agent next season. Maybe a first-round pick unprotected in 27 or 29, probably. Maybe a second or 2. Those left to give. But I mean, the Nets wouldn't have gotten a good, solid young player back in the deal that they can really kind of build around and have for the next 3 or 4 years. You don't address that That long-term prospects for that team aren't as good as it is working this trade with the Mavs, as you mentioned. And that's the other part of it is, the Nets, all of a sudden, they have a good number of draft picks. We're going to get to those in a minute. They also have really great mid-level players across every position that they can use in another deal if they wanted to make another deal to maybe compensate for the fact that they lost someone of that caliber in Kyrie Irving. But then you have a bunch of draft picks. You have a future. If KD leaves, you're not left with nothing. So 2 seasons ago when they had the big three there, when Harden was still there, it was like we have a bunch of star players on the wrong side of 30 and like no draft picks. So the future was very bleak for them, once you go out about 3 or 4 years. Now it's like we can somewhat compete this season and we have something to look forward to year 2, 3, 5 from now. Once KD winds down, once he leaves, something like that. So all things considered, I agree. I think this is the best they could have done. The package isn't great, but I mean, hey, they didn't have a lot of leverage. The Nets didn't have a lot to work with. Their time was limited. So all that being considered, this is a pretty good return. I don't think there's a whole lot to critique with this one.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's a great return. And, I heard that, it really came down to, think about, we'll talk about it more with, when we get into the numbers, but, Kyrie with all his antics and stuff, they weren't interested in giving him that 4-year supermax that he wants. And, he decided that because of that, he wants to leave and he wanted to go somewhere that would offer that. And I know the Lakers, they weren't interested in giving the 4-year deal because LeBron has a 2-year contract left and they didn't want to have something that's going longer than that. Once someone like LeBron is off your roster, I assume you want to do some retooling. And it's one of those things everyone knows. Kyrie knows, the Nets know, the Lakers know that if he hit free agency, that price drops substantially because you're paying for an asset that no one else is offering. So now, why pay him the money he wants? So I think the biggest thing is Dallas now has to pay that guy the extension. It's going to be interesting in terms of the implications for Dallas. I don't really like the fit. I understand why they did it. I understand why they're trying to keep Luka happy and trying to contend for a title. You get one of the greatest on-ball creators together ever in NBA history, and that's really exciting. And I think we're going to see some great glimpses. I think everyone has to contain themselves. You're going to see some great games where they really complement each other, but I think overall and in the future, I'm not pretty bullish on the connection and pairing.
I have the same thoughts. Immediately when I saw the pairing, I thought of Trey and DeJounte Murray, that pairing we've seen this season. It's not an exact comparison because DeJounte is a little bit different than any of the other 3 players, the way he plays, what he brings to the table. But think about how Trae Young has done this season after the trade. You look at the numbers, the box score numbers, 27 points a game, 9.9 assists, basically 10 assists a game. He's averaging a double-double. That's very impressive. So his actual numbers have not gone down from years past. What has gone down for Trae Young is the efficiency part. So his 3-point percentage is down 6 points from last season. He was at 38%, knocking on the door of 40. He is all the way down to 32 this season. That's probably below league average. So for a guy like Trae Young, you think of him as one of the better 3-point shooters in the league, at least. To be below average is definitely troublesome. And then you look at his 2-point percentage, that's down 3 points from last season, from 51 to 48%. So across the board, I mean, he's less efficient. He's not hitting the shots he did before. I think his looks have changed. The spots on the floor where he creates for himself, I think, are a little bit different. It's really hard to play, go back and forth with another high usage player when you've been high usage all your career.
Mm-hmm.
Trae Young was the guy with the ball since he got drafted several years ago. 39% usage last season, according to Clean the Glass, down to 37. So it's not like he never has the ball anymore. He still has the ball a lot, but it's like he has to operate off the ball a lot more. So I think that is thrown off his rhythm a little bit, thrown off the way he approaches the game. And I'm afraid that it's going to have the same impact on Luka, because you think about it, and these guys were drafted the same year. There's all these comparisons between Luka and Trae. Their career arcs are compared, and I think this is going to be the same thing. Luka has dominated the ball, maybe even more than Trey over this past 4 years or so. And Luka is always, according to Clean the Glasses numbers, over 40% usage. Like, that's absolutely crazy. Now he has to play with a guy like Kyrie, who's going to demand the ball quite a bit and take away some of those looks. Now Luka is not always going to be on the ball. He's going to have to find his spots away from the ball. That's a lot to deal with. So I'm afraid it's going to have a negative effect on Luka. Like you said, I mean, the numbers are going to be great. You look at the box score, it's going to be about the same. But I wonder if we dig beneath the surface a little bit and look at how these guys are getting their looks and their efficiency, I wonder if that's going to struggle. So I think that's a valid concern to look at from the Mavericks perspective. It could definitely hurt their chances.
I think the comparison to Trey and DeJounte, I think the one big difference to me is we've never seen Kyrie or Luka play off the ball. And, Trey Young, of course, he dominated the ball early in his career. He was always a pretty spectacular off ball, off screens, moving without the ball player. And that's why it was really exciting. They're definitely having an off year and they're regressing, which is sad. But I'm definitely more troubled about Dallas where, I can't remember a time where we saw Kyrie or Luka really generate a lot of offensive, value off the ball. So, it's going to be interesting to see how it all works out.
For sure. I mean, I
definitely also don't know who's playing defense.
Right. That's the other question, Mark, is how do they get stops?
Yeah.
So you go and look at how Dallas has fared overall in defense and hasn't been pretty. I mean, I'm back to Clean the Glass, and currently Dallas is ranked 23rd in the league in defense for the season, and slightly better in the past 2 weeks or so, more closer in line with league average on the defensive end of the floor. But still, I mean, this is a team that I think for a period there in the middle of the season, I mean, they were 27th in defensive efficiency.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you look at how Dorian Finney-Smith is moving on. Reggie Bullock hasn't been quite the same player. Christian Wood is solid defensively, but he's not going to be a great rim protector for you. So, I mean, Luka has size, but he's not going to chase around all these crafty point guards the entire game. Kyrie, I think, is capable, but his effort is just so up and down. Kind of like Westbrook. If you watch certain parts of the game, it's like, let's say it's the last 5 minutes in the game, and you've got to get a stop. He comes in and he hustles and fights around screens, and it's like, okay, this guy's isn't that bad. And then other parts of the game, it's like, okay, he's just kind of tuning out. He's going through the motions, he's coasting, and he's not getting a lot of he's not really doing a lot for your defense. So I wonder how this trade further weakens that defense. And if so, I really think it takes them out of the hunt for a championship in history, not even recent history, but all the way down the line. You look at championship teams, you have to be at least top 10 in defense to have a realistic chance. And I don't see Kyrie helping in that regard. So I think that's a valid question. And it's why another reason why this trade is good on paper, but beneath the surface, it leaves a little bit to be desired.
Honestly, it reminds me a lot of the Rajon Rondo trade to Dallas, the first one, when he was kind of upset in Boston when they already made that Brooklyn Nets trade. He was traded for Jay Crowder, different guys, and a lot of draft assets that, really, really helped Boston. And, the pairing in Dallas didn't really work out, because they were contending for a title. They had Dirk, they had all those guys, and they went out and got Rajon. So it really reminds me of that, and hopefully it ends a little better for Dallas in that sense. Yeah. But the similarities are definitely there.
They are for better or worse. I think a lot of it is for worse, unfortunately. So yeah, I just wonder how that's going to work out for those guys. Luckily, they kept Wood in this deal, so they still have Christian Wood, who's been having a sensational season. And I think it's realistic to say that. I mean, the Mavs from this point on could have one of the 5 or 6 best offenses in the entire league just because of how explosive they are in the backcourt. But now it's like, what else? Where do you stand on the other end of the floor? That's the question for them. So we're gonna have to wait and see how that works out for them. But at least they do get Markieff back in the deal, which we mentioned earlier. Not a whole lot from Markieff, I don't think, that they're going to get. I think he's going to have moments. He's definitely getting a little bit older. So, I mean, as far as creating in the mid-range for himself, and that could be a nice little pickup. Capitalizing on mismatches down there could be nice. But, yeah, he's no Dorian Finney-Smith, unfortunately. He was one of the best. I think last season he was one of the best kind of like glue guys, utility players, jack of all trades players in the entire league. So losing that is going to hurt. And
Absolutely.
If you were to say right now, well, I put this question on Twitter. Let me ask you this question. So I put on Twitter a little bit earlier. Do you think the Kyrie Irving trade was worth it, considering the fact that he's going to be a free agent this summer? So I said either yes. I put the options as yes. The star's available. You go for him no matter what, or no. He's too inconsistent. He's too much of a liability. Whatever the word you want to put in there, inconsistent, unreliable, whatever the case is. Like, which part of the spectrum do you fall on?
You know, I understand why you make the trade. I understand the situation Mark Cuban and the rest of the front office is in. You know, you have a star that's budding to be one of the greatest guys of all time in Luka. And to say he's not happy with the quality of the team, to say, you know, he hasn't been hurt by them getting knocked out in the playoffs constantly would be wrong. And I think getting a guy like that, that's a superstar that's at lower value than usual, it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, you do have to remember what Kyrie has done in his career. His few stops in all different places, Boston, Brooklyn, it hasn't worked out anywhere. And to think that, you know, we're different, it's going to work out here is being a little short-minded. But, you know, it had to come with some caveat that, you know, the extension will be, you know, team friendly. I just feel like it was a move you had to make. And if I was in their situation, I'd probably make the same move, but I'm not sure I'd be happy about the move, if that makes sense.
That it does make sense. And yeah, I get why they did it as well. Yeah, I'm really down on Kyrie, so I'm on the side that I don't think. I mean, it could be worth the risk, but I think there's a lot of ways you can go wrong.
I mean, don't get he's one of the best, you know, on-ball creators in the history of the NBA. But you know, there's different parts to it, and you also traded for the Kyrie the person, not just the player.
That's where
and you know, you need to extend Kyrie the player and Kyrie the person. So
yep. Unfortunately, if only we can have the player without the person, that would be gold right there, man.
And you know, everyone talked about how Kristaps Porzingis wasn't, you know, he didn't play in Dallas, blah blah blah. You know, he's played more games than Kyrie since 2019. So, you know, there's that point as well where, you know, Dallas loves to crap on the players for not playing as much, but you know, you just got a superstar that played a lot less games than you think since 2019.
Exactly. So I mean, there's a lot of different aspects of this deal. We covered the on-court perspective, which is pretty obvious, but we also need to discuss the financial impacts. We're talking about here the salary implications of this deal. So when it comes to how it impacts both teams, we have to look at basically what does the money look like for each team, because that affects your ability to make subsequent deals, a lot of different things. So that's something we got to look at here. So what I'm going to do here is bring up the tweet that our guy Neil Gagna just put out a little bit ago in regards to this deal here. So what we have is basically what he presented not too long ago. Let me bring this up here real quick. And here we go. So it doesn't quite fit into our boxes as cleanly as I would like, but you get the picture. So what we have here is the trade breakdown by Neil, where he highlighted the fact that Brooklyn created 2 traded player exceptions. So there's a $5 million and a $1.8 million from this deal. Also, there's a trade bonus that Kyrie has for 15%, and Dorian Finney-Smith, which is also 15%. That's actually a typo. That 5% here is a typo. So treat that as 15% as well. And Dinwiddie has 2 incentives that go from likely to unlikely. And the difference between likely and unlikely is likely was something that was achieved last season with that team. So let's say make the playoffs and one team made the playoffs. So it's a likely incentive. But if you go to another team and they didn't make the playoffs last season, that goes to an unlikely incentive. So I use that as an example. It's not the one that applies in the situation. I don't know what the criteria is for that
Right.
incentive to activate, but that's just an example. If it didn't happen last year, it's something that didn't happen last year with the Nets. So now it's an unlikely incentive. It could happen, but based on what happened last year, the criteria, the designation changes. So it's based on
Also, I wanted to make a side note about that, just for everyone thinking. The first thought when you hear unlikely and likely incentives is why don't you just make a contract that is full of unlikely incentives to, like, incentivize the guy to just, will you to the playoffs? They can only be 15% of the base salary that year. So
yeah.
unfortunately, the NBA thought about that.
They thought about that loophole. There's always a
Yeah.
loophole that owners, the front office staff are trying to exploit, and that's one that they closed up. So that one's not going to work. So as you can see here, his new cap hit is 19.5 million. So that's for Dinwiddie. So Dallas was on track for a $31 million tax bill. So that actually increases by 29 million for Dallas. You go and look at the two contracts that were moved, or these multiple contracts that were moved. And I mean, Kyrie is worth a lot of money. So if we go to our handy cap sheets over a no trade clause and I switch over to the Dallas Mavericks cap sheet, you can see here that, I mean, Kyrie's worth a whole lot of money. His contract for this season was 38.9 million. And of course, that's estimated because there are different things like incentives that can change that. But right here, it's basically 39 million for this season. So you add that on to Luka's supermax, basically contract here, and the total tax bill for the Dallas Mavericks now looks like 181 million. So we know that the luxury tax is 150, so they're over by a good amount. Plus, you got to add in the penalties that come with being over the tax by such an amount, and that's how you get 31 million here. And it's the opposite for Brooklyn. So they were going to have $105 million tax bill. So that's not their total salary for the team. That's just their tax bill. So, I mean, they were paying out major money to have this rise.
Yeah.
So you go here, and it's basically the inverse. So it decreases by 29 million. That's how you get a new tax bill of 76, which is still more than Dallas's, keep in mind here, but now it's down to just 76. So it lightens the load for Brooklyn a little bit. It's not as big of a pill to swallow if for some reason they don't make if they don't get out of the first round, or they don't even get close to a championship, then the hit on their books isn't quite as bad. So that's something to consider.
Definitely.
So if we look at the cap sheet here, this is Dallas' situation. You add in Kyrie Irving here. You look at Markieff Morris down here. He was only worth about 1.8 million. I believe that's the veteran minimum.
Yeah.
So Markieff was a very light hit. We go back here and we look at Brooklyn's situation. So now with Brooklyn, you add in Spencer Dinwiddie was worth 19, Dorian Finney-Smith about 12, and that's still a good amount less than Kyrie's contract was worth. Kyrie's was almost 40. So you're definitely shedding some salary, but you shed the salary and then you get back two very solid players. So look at all these contracts here, Aaron, that are between 19 with Dinwiddie and about 6 million with Patty, 8.4 with Seth. That's a lot of good salary filler they can use to package in another deal for another player. Definitely. So I think that's interesting to consider as well. Do you think they could possibly be on the hunt for another player after this Kyrie Irving deal?
Absolutely. I think it was already reported that they reached out to Toronto. I'm not sure how, actual that is, but I think those are definitely one of the a few of the best tradable contracts in the league right now. So it makes a lot of sense. And they're not really tied down for a long time. Most of their guys are up in 2024. So, they got a lot of flexibility, and it's going to be exciting to see for them. This makes a lot of sense. And over the span of about 3 days, they have totally changed their lineup, totally changed their salary cap implications, their situation financially, and it was impressive. Like I was gonna say, Kyrie, it was gonna be a supermax with an average salary around like $40 to $41 million, the extension I think, and they offered a 2 year, but to give him a 4 year deal, having Kevin Durant leave in 2 years and Ben Simmons up in 2 years, like that would be really tough and would really restrict their ability to do anything. So it's impressive they stayed firm, they didn't give in, and they came out a lot better financially.
They sure did. And one reason why I think they could be on the hunt for another player is because their backcourt is pretty bloated right now.
Yeah.
So you look at these names. Spencer Dinwiddie is one. Joe Harris is another one. Seth Curry, Patty Mills, Edmund Sumner can play a little bit in the backcourt here. So you go down Cam Thomas. I mean, there's a lot of guards here. They all play the 1 or the 2 position. So you look at all these guys, and I think that those are really solid backcourt pieces that you can package together in a deal for someone like a Van Vliet or someone like that. I mean, you talked about Toronto being in the mix. So if Toronto were to kind of turn the page and look to swap out some of those guys or swap out Van Vliet for some of the guys here on Brooklyn's roster, I think Van Vliet could fit very nicely into what Brooklyn is trying to do. So this is the benefit of having a lot of mid-tier contracts like this, is you can go out star hunting essentially and package this in with some draft picks and get yourself a nice player.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So while we're on the topic of draft picks, we need to talk about that real quick. But while I pull that up, did you have another note on
No, I was just going to say, I think that they could have one of the greatest trade deadline things that I've ever seen if they get, because I only had two small negatives on the Dallas trade. Would have loved them to see to try and get off the Ben Simmons contract. And I would have loved that 29 pick to be like 26 or 27. So, if they're able to get off Ben Simmons' contract and kind of give the reins to Spencer Dinwiddie, that would be pretty impressive.
It sure would. There's definitely a wish list there. I think the Ben Simmons contract is going to be it would be an extreme challenge to try to move that one.
Yeah.
Over $30 million for the next 3 to 4 years is a tough pill to swallow for a guy that's been very much diminished in the past couple of years for a lot of reasons that I'm sure we've covered plenty already, but
Definitely.
That's a tough deal to move. But I do have our draft capital page pulled up here on notradeclause.com, which, slight little plug. If you guys are looking for this kind of information, definitely be sure to check out our site. We have all this stuff here for you. But I went through and I updated the pick situation here earlier. So you see now that there was a 27-second that Dallas had that was moved. Now, the thing about this is it's not completely finalized because it was reported that Dallas moved a 27-second and then also they also moved a 29-second. Those could have protections. I'm not sure if they're included or not.
Right.
But the 29 was reported as unprotected. So that one's gone completely. So you see here, Dallas is out their picks in 29 if this holds, and then 27 they're down a pick, so they only have their first. But before this deal, I mean, once you get out of this protected pick territory here, this stems from the Porzingis deal where they had 3 picks in a row that were basically all kind of dependent on each other. They're all protected 1 through 10. Once you get out of that, 6 through 9, they were all pretty much free to be traded. So now that 29 is out, they can no longer trade a 28 pick because of the Stepien rule. So now if they wanted to make another deal, it pretty much have to be the 27 pick. Because 26, depending on what happens to 25 here, their protections could be on its way out. So it had to be a 27, and then their second round picks are basically gone from 26 to 29. And then also in 23 and 24, they're gone. And in 25, that could be out if none of these picks convey in 23 to 25. So, I mean, Dallas basically lost all their seconds. They don't have any more seconds to deal. So they'd be down to their 27 first, and then all of that salary filler they have, which I think would be enough to get a guy like Van Vliet if they wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think seconds are definitely overstated a little bit these days. Especially we've been seeing them go for $2-3 million, a really easy price. So I understand that, but aside from that, that 23 to 25 where it's all kind of tied up is definitely tough. And they went in all on winning, so hopefully they do some winning.
Yeah, if you're all in like Dallas is, I mean, they're trying to take advantage of Luka's window, so to speak. This window they have with one of the greatest talents of all time. Yeah, seconds are a small price to pay. Like you said, they're not worth a whole ton. So having basically none for the next several years is not a huge deal, especially if they start winning with Luka and Kyrie. They're not
Right,
going to miss those picks one bit. They wouldn't really
right.
mean anything. So that's not a huge deal. Shifting over to Brooklyn's situation, it's a lot different from Dallas's. So we see with Brooklyn here in 24, they're still lacking picks. In 26, they're down to 1 second. But you look farther out in their draft capital situation here, they gained the second here from
Yep.
Dallas, 27. They gained a 29 first and second from Dallas. So I listed those here. So they now have 4 picks in 29, which could be very useful because I'm sure by then Katie will have hung it up. I mean, you never know these days. I mean, LeBron might be he's like 43. I mean, I don't know, but I would assume that KD would be on his way out by then. So having 4 picks, 2 first and 2 seconds in 29 is definitely useful.
Those
Uh,
those seventh graders are looking really good.
they're already in the gyms. Take a look at these guys. They're already prepping. So they're already eyes on the new prospects coming in for the next generation. Uh, but yeah, you look at the 28. They still have their 28 first and second. Philly first and seconds could be incoming based on what happens in 27. In 27, I believe that's a pick swap. Yep. So you get the least favorable of their pick with Houston's. That's still branching from the James Harden deal. They have Dallas second in 27, and from there, I mean, it's a little muddled up because they're still paying the price from that deal with Houston, but I mean, they do have a lot to work with here. So you look at all these picks they have to trade. Uh, it's a better situation they were in. I would say like 2 years ago. I think that's a good way to put it. So
Yep, yep.
still not like a ton of draft capital, but they have more pieces definitely here than they had. I would say just a couple of years ago. So from that perspective, they're doing better. There's still a lot of protections in here, but I would say that Brooklyn's future is a lot brighter than it was about a couple of years ago. They had nothing. So that's definitely progress on their part.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
And trying to shift over here, but yeah, you can essentially see where Brooklyn is with their pick situation. And I'll go back one more time, bring this up. So yeah, you can see here in 23, that's kind of a muddled situation. They get the most
Yeah,
favorable here.
it's one of the craziest things ever. Trying to follow that one, but
It's wild, man. I don't know why the NBA allows this stuff. It's like the least favorable goes to this team, the second goes to this team, the first. It's such a
right.
mess, man. And if you're wondering why we have so many different colors on our draft capital page, this is why. Because there's so many different possibilities all these picks conveying. That's why we have to basically do this here where you got your oranges and your greens and your blues and your yellows and purples, and that's where it comes in. It's pretty funny to
Yeah.
look at that. So yeah, you can see basically Brooklyn's situation, you can see Dallas's situation. uh, Definitely interesting here. Any other thoughts from you, Aaron, on this draft pick situation? I mean, the 29 first was definitely a big price to pay, but hey, it's Kyrie Irving. It's kind of the cost of doing business.
Right, right. I agree. And I think a lot of people have to understand this was really a lot about money. And the CBA and the salary cap get a little confusing, but to think about it kind of like a stock. The Brooklyn Nets would right now, when extending someone, you're kind of bidding against no one. You're bidding against the hypothetical contract comparisons that you're gonna see in free agency in a few months. They decided that after a lot of antics and maybe different things, if Kyrie was to hit free agency, there wouldn't be many bids on that stock, right? And so now, if no one's buying a stock, that stock drops substantially in price. So it was a business move. It was saying, we know this is going to be much cheaper in the summer, and Kyrie's team also knew that. And that's why he made a big point. And, it seemed like it was all going well. Everything was kind of behind them. But then once Brooklyn was like, we're not giving you the money right now because it doesn't make sense to give you the money. Kyrie's like, I agree, it doesn't make sense to give me money, but I want the money because I know I'm also not getting the money. So trade me. So,
Yeah.
it was one of those things like, how did this come about? Like after being, an all-star starter, having a great season with Brooklyn, he knows he needs the money now. And clearly, hopefully Dallas is inclined to give him that money. But, it was a really big money move. So that's something that a lot of people, have to understand about this.
Yeah, you got to understand the implication from all sides: the basketball, the on-court perspective, the money, the draft picks, and then specifically with the draft picks, I think this is another market-defining move. Uh, this past summer, we saw a market-defining move in that Gobert Donovan Mitchell trade.
Yeah.
So essentially, we saw the asking price of somebody like Gobert, somebody that's a multiple-time defensive player of the year guy, multiple-time All-Star. You saw the going rate for a guy like that. That's locked up for several seasons. That's the difference here because Gobert locked up for 4 years. I mean, that's a commodity that you're getting at no risk. He's going to be.
Right.
I mean, there's some risk because he can decline in his play, but as far as him leaving, that's not going to happen because he's under contract.
Right.
Kyrie Irving is under contract for less than one half of a season with Dallas. We're past the halfway point. So you're getting essentially, I would say, like a third of a season of Kyrie Irving if he decides to leave this summer.
Yeah.
So that's why we see in this deal, Dallas only lost 1 first right here in 29. They lost 2 seconds. And we just got done talking about how seconds are not the prized possession that first rounders are. So when you're trying to figure out the true asking price of a deal, we look to the first rounders. 1 first rounder, yes, it was unprotected, but 1 first rounder to get a guy like Kyrie Irving's caliber, that goes to show you how much of his reputation, I think, has diminished over the years, and the fact that he carries so much risk because he's pretty injury prone, I would say. He's prone to having, let's just
conspiracy theories.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Off-court problems. And he can leave in free agency. So I think that's why Dallas is like, we'll make the deal, but we're not giving up any more than 1 first. One,
Right.
because we don't have a ton of first to give you. I mean, the only other one they could have given was this one, 27. But also because this guy could leave. So we're not going to give you our entire pick arsenal and all these great players just to have maybe a third of a season of Kyrie Irving. It just wouldn't make sense for them.
A third of a season, or having to be the one to pay him the $40 million he wants. It's both not definitely the greatest route. So
I wonder how this summer is going to go in terms of the negotiation between him and Dallas.
Yeah.
From Dallas, I mean, I'm taking the same stance as Brooklyn. I don't want to offer him a max contract for 4 or 5 years. I mean, I just want to feel comfortable with. He's already almost 31 years old. He has a history of antics and getting dissatisfied with his current situation. I mean, it's just it's a lot to deal with. So I mean, his cap hold is 42, but I mean, his max is pretty close to that, I would say. Probably around that area. So if we're projecting out, let's say 4 years, I mean, that takes you through the entire tenure of Luka. So I mean, that coincides with Luka's possible free agency in 26, 27, all the way over here. So I think that's just way too much money to commit to a guy that hasn't shown he's going to be on the court for more than 60 games a year.
Right.
And can kind of implode your locker room everywhere he goes, it seems like. So those negotiations would be interesting. If you were the front office for Dallas, Aaron, I mean, what would you feel comfortable offering them? Like, is this 38 still too high? Are you looking at like mid 30s for a new contract for Kyrie? Like, what do you feel like is reasonable considering what you'd be dealing with a guy like Kyrie Irving?
Yeah, I think it's more of the years than the average salary. I think it's the 4 years is just too much for me. But I think the going rate is definitely going to be. I think it's 105% of his previous salary, so I think it's going to be close to that $42 million deal. And I'd be comfortable with it. He's a great, amazing superstar, and when he's on the court, and
He's on the court.
kind of just when he's just playing basketball, an amazing asset.
Oh
So,
yeah.
if I could get him down from that 4 years, I'd be comfortable giving him, that max that he wants.
Sure. I get that. And it's going to be interesting to see like how they deal with Christian Wood, because if you look down 3 rows, Christian Wood is also a free agent. Dwight Powell
Yep.
is a free agent.
Yep.
So I mean, that's just oof. That's tough for the Mavs. I mean, I can see their tax bill next season just being astronomical
Yeah.
because you look at their projected cap space. I mean, that's not factoring in any new deals.
Right.
So Kyrie already eats up pretty much all of that. And then Christian Wood, I mean, he's going to be in line for, I mean, I would say he's looking for more than 21 based on the years we've had. So he's going to want 25 to 30 probably in free agency.
And then, with the new CBA agreement coming up and them kind of restricting, maybe putting a hard cap or something like that on, you have to take that into account. So it's going to be interesting, but the big thing is when you trade for someone like Kyrie, you're also inheriting his bird rights. You're allowing yourself to offer more money next year than the rest of the league. So, you do have some flexibility, and I expect ongoing, conversations. So.
Yeah, it's definitely going to last from now all the way until July. I wouldn't bet against that at all. It's gonna be I think a little bit of time to kind of find a deal with him, but when they do, hopefully it isn't something that handicaps that team too much. I would say maybe a 3-year deal would be fair, a nice compromise between both sides. 35, maybe even 40 per year for 3 years might be fair, but we'll have to see how that goes. I think it also depends on what happens this season, leading up into the playoffs and how they do in the playoffs, and they can influence Kyrie's willingness to re-sign or not, for sure.
Definitely.
So I think that's all we have, ladies and gentlemen. We thank you guys again for tuning in. There's a lot to unpack in this deal, and hopefully Aaron and I have done a good job at kind of explaining all that for you guys, exactly what's involved, what it can mean for these teams' futures, and what it can mean for their upcoming playoff runs here in the Eastern and Western Conferences, respectively. And of course, if you're looking for all that information, the cap sheets I referenced, the draft capital page I referenced, in addition to additional resources like our podcast, transaction log, articles, everything like that, you can find it all at notradeclause.com. We're always updating it. Our cap sheets were updated, I would say 30 minutes after the deal was announced. Draft capital, the same thing. So that's something we pride ourselves on, and we're going to do the same thing when trade deadline comes up later this week. We'll be on top of that for you guys. Make sure you always have the most up-to-date information. So with that being said, everybody, thanks again for joining us for another podcast. We'll be back real soon to discuss more things like this, more money, more on court, all that stuff. That's what we're passionate about, and that's what we want to bring you. So be sure to tune into the next podcast. And in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll catch you on here real soon. Take care, everybody.